Welcome to episode 52 of Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. One way to relate to what is going on in the world right now is to see external events as a parallel for events that you have undoubtedly gone through in your own life. We have all gone through changes and are aware of the feelings that accompany that. But let's break it down. We as a society are at a point where we need to confront something that has been ignored, a path of change that has been backburnered. We as individuals have experienced that phenomenon as well. We've all done it. We know that something is off, which makes us itchy and uncomfortable. Our internal voice is yelling at us, but we want to hide in what feels comfortable. We are more comfortable dealing with the itch for change than we are in stretching into the newer, higher level version of ourselves. We know it needs to be done. We just want to put it off. When we want to put off change, we throw all sorts of distractions and deflections in the way. That is easy to do because there are thousands of ways that we can take our attention off what is needed. Fortunately, the pandemic is making that more difficult to do. Every change that must happen brings up the 5 stages of grief as defined by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You think of these as being applicable to the death of someone, but every change that must happen is a death. It is the death of what was before, without a full understanding of how you will benefit from what is to come. It's a disruption that may not be entirely welcome. It is a leap of faith. The first stage in dealing with the need for change is denial. We know a change is needed, but all that brings up for us is fear and the innate response to run and hide. We don't want to deal with what we may have to do. The second stage is anger. We feel frustrated and anxious about being challenged. The third stage is bargaining. We toy with all sorts of false beliefs that we can somehow avoid the change. We look at all the what ifs. The fourth stage is depression. We become overwhelmed and hostile that we are being challenged. It feels like it's too much and quite possibly unachievable. The fifth stage is acceptance. This is the glorious moment when you let go of your resistance and do what needs to be done. It's when you stop struggling in the water and allow yourself to float to the surface. Ever since you were born, you have had to make changes, yet this process kicks in every time. It is extremely rare to have your first step be the one where you release all fear and let yourself float. Some of the changes you have had to make are ones of your own choosing. Even though you chose to change, you are not exempt from the agonizing process. Other changes are ones that are needed in the collective culture. These are not timed to match your current level of preparedness. They happen when they need to happen for the greater good. Even though they may not seem to be directly related to you, your involvement is necessary and will take you through the stages of grief. It just so happens that we are facing multiple necessary changes in our collective culture right now. Buckle up. Let's look at one of those changes. It has to do with the way that law enforcement has systematically dealt with people of color. This problem goes all the way back to slave days and is still alive and kicking today. We have the phone camera footage to back that up. The sad thing is that we have been told that this is the case forever and simply decided to stay in step one, denial. We couldn't imagine that people could act in such an unjust and organized fashion. We chose not to take people at their word when they told us just how awful it was. Then came the advent of the phone in everyone's pocket. Honestly, this may be one of the biggest game changers of the century. Every person can now show us what is happening in their corner of the world at the drop of a hat. It used to require a news organization deciding to cover something and then sending a crew out to capture the moment. Obviously, people will not act the same way around a camera crew as they will around your average person standing by or looking out their window. The video camera that can be found in most people's pocket has blown it all wide open. Those who are accused of the brutality are deeply entrenched in the stage of denial. They deny what we are seeing because they don't want us to know what they've been doing. They don't want their profession to be cast in a negative light. But we now have the proof. It is no longer justifiable for any of us to stay in the denial stage, even if burying our heads in the sand is more comfortable. So we see the footage and move into the anger stage of dealing with the problem. We feel frustrated and anxious about now realizing that this is an issue, a big, ugly issue. We feel this because, if we are entirely honest, we wish we didn't know. The knowing creates the responsibility for action on our part. What we have seen cannot be unseen. We can no longer pretend that this is not an issue. It also shatters our illusion that law enforcement was upholding the vow of serving and protecting. We want to think that there are people who will do the work we deem necessary, the work we don't individually want to do, and that they will do it in an honorable way. We entrusted them with power, and we are betrayed by their not using that power in the way we thought they would. We want the comfort of having been right to give them that power, and we don't want the responsibility for not keeping the guardrails on them that they desperately needed. If you have been paying attention, it is impossible to miss the fact that all organizations, whether in the fields of governing, religion, finance, etc., all unchecked organizations tend to become criminal operations. It's not because the people involved are terrible people. It is because they are human people. No human is equipped to deal with unchecked power over others. It just isn't in our makeup. We will mess it up almost every time. That's why we must love each other enough to hold each other accountable. But it still makes us mad to see what others do. We've all got enough issues to deal with in our own lives. We are angry when we have to get involved with things that are beyond the scope of our own personal choices. But that is our job as part of the collective culture. So we are angry that we have to reassess our suppositions about law enforcement, and they are angry that they are being called into question. They have benefited from some people putting police into the same patriotic category as mom and apple pie. To lose that reverence is difficult. To question their actions is seen by some as fully unpatriotic. But we know that no one should be without checks and balances. It destroys their souls even more than their actions harm others. It is a very human reaction to being called out, to double down, and that is what we see in the streets where protesters are marching. We see some members of law enforcement pulling out the old, "I'll give you something to cry about." That is what parents used to say to an upset child. If the child was crying, they would threaten to inflict physical punishment on the child, making them cry more, but in a way that was of the parent's own doing, thereby, somehow, more acceptable. I know, sick. But the officers who are angry about being called abusive seem to be itching to show us that they can be even worse if they want to, which seems like they are only making the case against them. They may think that they are showing us that they have been, in some situations, using restraint that they didn't want to use. It's not a productive strategy. A bigger show of power when accused of not responsibly using the power you have already been granted is not making the point you want. And the choices from the administration to bring in more angry law enforcement officers to beat down the protesters just shows how widespread and out of control the problem really is. It also shows how unskilled and one-note our current leaders are. If it can't be quelled by violence, then they are out of ideas. It's as illogical as the argument that what we see in the streets right now is somehow attributable to the next administration, should we be lucky enough to get one. People are marching for equal treatment under the law. People are marching to ensure the safety of each and every person as they go about living their lives. People are marching because people of color too often are on the receiving end of brutality and even death. The solution to those problems cannot be found through more brutality, and this problem must be solved. So we move along to the next step, bargaining. Bargaining. It is something that we have all tried. When things aren't going as we wish, we make deals in our heads, deals that are not usually rooted in reality. If this doesn't happen, then I won't ever do blank again. We try all the angles of what if. We entertain the false belief that we can avoid what is happening right in front of us. We also can look at a huge problem and test out the option of changing a tiny bit of it. Like, I'll stop overspending right after I buy this one last thing that I really want. Or instead of allowing all our officers to brutalize people, we will get rid of the 3 who have the longest records of brutality. It's so very human to try to sell a quick, lesser fix to a problem, because those are the easiest and require the least of us. It goes against our nature to take the time to really dig into a problem and fix it at the root. But anything less than digging the entire root out will never solve the problem. I can attest to that based on the weeds in my garden. We need to do the difficult, taxing work. If done correctly, it can result in an actual solution and an end to the problem. The alternative is to kick it down the road another mile and hope it disappears. It never does. It just further metastasizes. Once we are unable to end or mitigate the problem through trickery, we get to the next step, depression. When we hit this step, we just feel overwhelmed and hostile. We are not only hostile about the problem, we are hostile towards those who brought it to our attention. We are infuriated that they won't just let it go. We had hoped we could wait them out, but it didn't work. The Black Lives Matter protests have been going on for quite some time now. They are not going to leave without being brought to the table to work on a solution. They can be labeled, shoved, shot at, and still they persist. We've not yet made it to the final step, acceptance. I think the only way we will get there is when we have leaders who are at higher levels of spiritual awareness. People who understand that this is a wrong that needs to be righted. The protests are a sign that we are ready to grow. They will stop when we do just that. The efforts to shut them down by violence will not end the cycle. Politicians who think they will control the impulse to grow are sadly mistaken. They will only make things worse. They continue to throw gasoline on the fire. The only way forward is to learn the lesson, do the hard work, and fix what is wrong. This is why we need people in power who are there to represent the best that we are capable of being. We need people who will challenge us to do better. Let's keep pushing while recognizing that not all of the participants in this drama are currently working on the same step of grief that we are. And let's remember that they are not working from the same grade level of spiritual awareness either. So, for those at the lower levels, we are asking them to step up in a way that they never have in the past. This is a more painful process for some than it is for others, but nothing can or should stop us. The rebirth is reliant on everyone moving forward. To do so will require that we examine our past, the past that we have been avoiding, atone for those sins, and then move to a higher level with the growth we have earned. This will create the world that we want to live in, the one where it is understood that every single person is a beloved child of the Creator and deserving of the treatment that comes with that status. Let's stop resisting the work and reach that final step, the acceptance. Thanks for listening to Rebirth Revolution. My hope is that it is helping you put some of the puzzle pieces together. Let others know if you think that might help. They can find us everywhere you get podcasts and on YouTube. If this brings up any questions for you, email us at rebirthrev@gmail.com. Until next week, muster up all the compassion you possess. Keep watching the raw footage. Let go and allow yourself to float. And wear your mask. Remember, you are loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Stay strong, open, and most of all, stay safe. We need you in the revolution.